Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
You are listening to another episode of Advanced Freelancing, and today we're going to talk all about what you need to know when you're doing cold pitching and how you can do it a little bit better. So my guest today is an expert in this topic. So welcome to the show, Sophia. Why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and how long you have been offering your freelance services?
Hey, Laura. First, thanks for having me. I'm super glad to be here. So I've been freelancing full-time since 2016, and I work with SaaS companies, agencies, and thought leaders. So I usually help them launch products and basically sell their products better. That's my main focus. And I think that was all the questions.
Yeah, wonderful. So how do you come across most of your clients? How do you get connected to them to be working with them? Are you doing cold pitching? Are you doing some other type of marketing?
So by this point, because I'm now 4 years in, a lot of it is referrals. But initially, when I first started, I am not from a marketing background. So I had zero connections to the industry. I actually studied archaeology at university, and then I worked in retail. So in terms of how outside of this world I was basically as outside as you can possibly get. At uni, I had no idea that marketing was even a career you could have. It had never occurred to me. So when I came into it, that's when I used co-pitching to really meet the people I needed to meet and get in front of the companies I wanted to work with so they could know who I am.
Right. What was the catalyst that made you decide to start freelancing and doing this kind of work?
Well, so after college, I went to uni in Scotland. Me and my husband decided to move to the States because he's American. We're like, hey, why don't we check it out over there? You can go back home. We can see what it's like for me. And so we moved, but I had no network. I had no idea what I wanted to do. By this point, I kind of knew that I didn't want to get into archaeology as a career because you could either go the academia route. That was A, very competitive, and B, really put you in a box. You had to do very specific things to get there. And I wasn't interested in that. And in terms of doing field archaeology as a career, that basically kills your body by the time you're 30. Most archaeologists I know are pretty injured by this point. So I wasn't interested in that either. And so I thought, okay, well, I need a job. What am I going to do? And I always wanted to do writing, but I kind of assumed that to write you had to be a novelist. So I looked into that, and I realized that at this point in my life, I didn't feel I could add enough to be a good novelist. So I was like, right, I need to wait to have some more experience to actually feel that I could write good books that people would want to read. And that's when I started just Googling about things to do with writing. And I found Upwork. And I was like, people pay you to write things. Okay, that's interesting. I have no idea why that didn't occur to me before, but let's try that. So I made an Upwork profile. I got a few really, really low paying gigs. I'm talking $2 for a blog post. And to me, because this was completely new, I was like, okay, wow, that's really interesting. People pay you for words. I can write words. Let's do this. And so I did a couple of those jobs, and I realized it was completely soul crushing, and that anybody who's ever written for $2 an hour knows that very, very quickly, any excitement you had goes away completely. I was like, right, yeah, this is unsustainable. So how do people with sustainable writing jobs get them? Then I Googled some more, and I found some job boards. I was like, okay, so I can do that. I started pitching some blog posts, and slowly from there, I learned a bit about the format and how you could write and what blogging was actually all about. And I started my own blog, about 3 of them, and they were all terrible and they eventually failed. But that kind of taught me how to write. And from there, it took about 2 years. I'm not one of those people who got there very fast. It took me about 2 years to get to a full-time level of work and income. And it felt painfully slow at the time. But it was just trying things, iterating, trying code emails and being really, really terrible at them and getting nowhere for the longest time until I figured out what worked for me. So a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, I think that's the way that a lot of freelancers get started. And it's really the main difference is how long you spend in that trial and error space. So when you're first starting to dive into cold pitching, I know a question that a lot of freelancers have is, well, how do I find companies that I'm going to pitch, right? Like the big advantage of job boards is that the jobs are already posted there. What do you recommend as far as doing research before even writing a cold pitch to someone?
Okay, so what I eventually found really worked for me is I went for companies that whose products I used. So I use a lot of software, and so I before that I tried pitching. I tried going on Angel List and looking through companies that had big marketing budgets and pitching them. And so that is a solid way to do it, I think. But it didn't work for me because I didn't feel I had anything to add to the conversation with them. So I think my pitches were just a bit bland, because I was coming at it from the point of, oh, well, you do marketing, I do marketing. We can kind of do average marketing together, which is not a great way to like get somebody to pay attention to you, because these people are working incredibly hard. They're getting a bunch of cold pitches thrown their way. They have no idea who you are. They basically have no reason to take a chance on you. And even though like my pitches weren't terrible, like I followed them with the best advice. Like they were short, they were to the point. You know, when you have like that bit at the beginning where you're meant to like say something personal to make a connection, like I had that, but they were just average. And so after doing that and after really not feeling it, what worked for me was just going through my inbox and be like, I use this product, I use this product, I use this product. I love this about this company. They appear to be selling quite well. So let's connect on that. And then I started my pitch with actually talking to them about how I used their product and what I loved about it. And that's how we started the conversation. So it was almost less structured, but because I already knew who this company was, it showed that I had buy-in, that I was interested in who they actually were, and that I was, interested in helping them because I loved what they did. I was their ideal customer. And that gave me that perspective.
Yes, I think that's a big mistake that a lot of freelancers make is, yeah, you might think, well, I can sit down and I can write 15 cold pitches really quickly. And I'm just going to think of these companies that might have the money or are really well-known names, and I'm going to pitch them. And if you don't put the time and effort into writing a little more personalization into the pitch, I mean, those companies, those CMOs and CEOs are being pitched all the time. A lot of times your email isn't even getting through the gatekeeper or the administrative assistant that's helping to manage the email inbox. And so you have to stand out from the crowd. I help produce a really popular podcast, and we get terrible cold pitches weekly, and they're all bad in the same way, and that they're super generic. It has nothing to do with our audience for the show. It really is a pitch for this person is amazing because X, Y, and Z, and they wrote this book and they did this particular talk. And that has nothing to do with like what we're interested in, which is what is the value that this guest could bring to this audience. And if you don't have that level of personalization, you're going to struggle. So starting with companies that you actually know, you like, is a big way to make that introduction, because you're speaking very authentically. You already know about them. You're not just pulling their name from a massive list of people that you're going to cold pitch. This is someone that maybe it's a company that you look up to, or it's a product that you have used. And at the very least, it's going to get the attention of the people who receive it, because they're going to be curious what you had to say about them and your experience working with them as well.
Yep, like what you just said, I agree with that so much, because so many of us, and me included when I was first starting out, we think of cold email as a numbers game. So you send like a bunch of cold emails out there and somebody would get back to you. And sure, like if you hit somebody at the exact moment in time when they're like, oh man, I'm desperate for a writer today, and you happen in their inbox and they actually notice you, that can work. But for me, what I actually found works far better is not to treat it as a number game. It's a relationships game. Yes. Like, sure, they don't know who you are yet, but it's just like chatting to somebody at a networking event. I find that for my personality, it's far better that I focus on a few people that I genuinely think are awesome. And I think we can both benefit from getting to know each other better. And then taking that much slower approach, because some of the code emails I send, they take me up to an hour occasionally to actually put together. And that's not counting years of having used the product. But it means that, yeah, sure, you're investing some more time, but that's a relationship that's going to keep giving long term, because you have to think about like, who you want to work with and what you want your career to look like, not just like in the next month or two, but in like the next 5 to 10 years. Like, who are the people that you can benefit from having really good relationship from, and the people that can benefit from like knowing you.
Yes, pitching is not, I mean, in some sense, it's always a numbers game because, of course, if you're not sending any pitches, you're not getting any business. But if if you're going to spend the same hour sending 10 really generic cold pitches or writing 1 or 2 really good ones, please write the 1 or 2 really good ones, because your chance of getting business is actually higher with 1 or 2 really well-written pitches than it is with 10 generic ones that are essentially spamming that person with no unique information. I mean, if you own a website, you have received the crappy cold email pitch from the companies in India offering you backlink services or SEO, and they're all almost identical, right? We lead a company that does SEO and you should hire us and we have many packages available. It doesn't tell you anything and you don't want to work with them. And 9 times out of 10, that email goes to spam. So you never want your cold pitch to seem as though it did belong in the spam folder to begin with. So we talked about personalization. We've talked about making the effort to put some time into writing your pitch. What other things should freelancers keep in mind when they're writing cold pitches to get clients?
So always personalize to the client. It's the other main thing I think is that while it's very important to think about best practices and keep them in mind, like best practices like keep it as short as possible or like do all the things, you also have to adapt cold email to who you are too. And that's something at the beginning that I didn't do. And when I started doing it, when I actually started being myself in my emails, I found that worked a lot better. And that will also look different depending on the company you are working for. So an example that always comes to mind is a friend of mine who spent, I think it was essentially days crafting this really detailed pitch to a dream company of hers. And this person that she was going to send that pitch to, like, hates cold email, is on the record as somebody who just believes the cold email never works, that it's just a terrible waste of time and you're far better off doing more traditional inbound marketing. But because that pitch was so targeted, the person ended up buying a $12,000 project because it was very specific to them. But like conversely, I also sent a really, really short pitch because I was aware that the company was much faster moving kind of pace. And I ended up closing about 9.5K of projects with these guys with a very, very short introduction. So it's keep your audience in mind. Like with any marketing you do, you have to know who you're writing to. And the other thing is that a cold email success, you have to measure it based on, like, you have to have a specific CTA. So you have to know what you want them to say. And that's usually not closing a project. So cold email is more about building a relationship versus a sale. So the next thing I learned is that if you want to be successful at cold email marketing, you have to get good at sales calls. Because my initial leads, I dropped quite a few. They were interested in working with me because my sales calls technique at the time was not great. I was not great.
Hey, if you're listening to this episode, then the 6-Figure Freelancer book is available for pre-order. The book drops on October 20th, 2020, but you can pre-order the book now and get 4 special bonuses that no one else will have access to. Visit www.sixfigurefreelancebook.com to discover how you can pre-order and send in your receipt to get special bonuses that will be revealed to you and sent to your email inbox on October 1st, 2020. This is in addition to the 17 worksheets and exercises that come for everyone who buys the book. And trust me, you're going to want these bonuses: tips on branding, pricing, sales calls, and so much more. Oh, that's very interesting. And I think there's a really good point in there about doing research on the person or the company that you're writing to, especially if you're writing to an executive. That person may have been quoted in news articles. They might have been interviewed on other podcast shows. Mm-hmm. So this is your chance to, as part of your research process, learn a little bit more about them personally. It's not just about the company. Maybe you have something else in common with that person that's going to be the lead in to opening that conversation with them. So don't keep it strictly limited to business. If there's something authentic, you can say, recently I hired a Facebook ad strategist, and I had sent her an email with just some requests for some more information and, all of that. And in her follow-up email, she connected with me, and in her signature, she mentioned that she liked RuPaul's Drag Race and was a big fan of it. And so that was a big piece of conversation between the two of us during the sales call. And it really, like, the fact that we connected in that way, and it's something that I called out, it was just a great way to build the relationship. And so you can always do that additional research. So you're so right when you said that the pitch is not about getting the business. No person is going to write back to you and go, "Hi, stranger. Sure, send me over the contract and your bank information and we'll wire the money to start right away." That never happens, okay?
Nope.
The pitch is about opening the conversation to lead to something else. So if you're trying to get them on a call, then have that be the call to action. Don't have your call to action be, "Well, here's my website and here's my portfolio and here's another sample piece I did. And if you'd ever like to talk, maybe you can reach out and you can see me on social." No, way too many CTAs. Keep it simple. Make it clear that you want to talk to them specifically about the service that you're pitching on a call together. So let's talk a little bit about those sales calls, because every freelancer is terrified of them. What would you say you were doing wrong in those initial calls where, the opportunity and the pipeline was really warm, but it kind of fell apart at the call stage?
I think a lot for me was I was just so terrified and so panicky. And in my head, I had the thought that I should somehow be good at sales calls because I was good at copywriting, and copywriting is essentially just selling with words, but on paper. And I just didn't practice. And I realized that, all those like sales training stuff, like doing role playing and things, there's a reason why so many companies do them. They work. So what I did is I would literally stand in front of the mirror and talk through my main points that I wanted to mention at a sales call until they started coming out as like a normal human would speak. And the other thing, and I learned that thing from Joanna Weed from Copy Hackers, was to just make a list of wins that you've had and read them to yourself before the call. So that way you feel more confident when you go in. Like you've reminded yourself of like why you're good and why you're awesome. And the third part is you should only be talking for about 10% of that call. Like the initial sales call is to really learn about the person's problems, what they're struggling with, and to figure out if you can help them or not. And because it's a cold email, sometimes you may not be the most ideal person to help them. And that's when it's really handy to have a network of people in your industry that you can refer to them. And that's something that has served me really well too.
Yeah, that only talking for 10% of the call, that's huge because you've already done the research. And so I like the tip from Joanna as well. And Copy Hackers is an excellent resource, especially if you are a writer. But they also have great trainings on things like Facebook ads. That's actually how I started to learn Facebook ads as well. And I think what is important is that you've got to be comfortable when you're doing the call. So sometimes I even write bullet points of like, the thoughts that I have that are more coherent when we're not on the call. But in case I start getting flustered or I forget something, I have those pulled up on my computer to be able to reference back to them like, okay, this is the things that I think I was going to pitch to them, and to keep me on track if there's any particular things that I wanted to share. But a sales call is not your opportunity to pick up the call and start pitching the client right away on why they need to hire you. It's to hear what is it that they need right now? What is the main pain point that they have? And then you can use that conversation to lead into questions about your service. So let's talk about, you're on the call, it's going well, you're answering questions. How do you close the call? What do you do to take it from call to next step in the process?
Actually, the very first call for me, and that call is usually between 15 minutes to a max of half hour, it's to figure out if it's a yes from me and a yes from the client. So I do no sales on that call. Like we may touch on a budget, but it will be like a very, very, very top-down potential. The main purpose of that call is to get them to a next call, which is basically a 45-minute discovery call, where we then really dig deep into what they need. And I found that with that, you qualify and you lead. So instead of spending a bunch of time of putting a proposal together based on something that they may kind of want from you, with the first qualification call, you've both basically said, yes, I'm interested in figuring out if there's something that we can actually both do together. And then you spend that next call like digging in so deep into exactly what they may need. And that's when you kind of start figuring out budgets and things, and you start creating a proposal. So then when you send them the proposal, and again, I actually like to present the proposal on a call so that they know exactly what's going on, your close rate is going to be so much higher.
Wow, I had never actually thought of that, of presenting the actual thing on the call. I never thought about that. And so that's a great way to walk them through it, because one of the things we often struggle with is being able to communicate why we're recommending particular things. And you don't want the client to just look at the proposal and go, wow, this is expensive. I don't know if I need all this. You want to walk them through, this is the reason that I'm recommending this particular thing. And this is how I structured it based on our previous conversation and my look at your website or whatever other materials that you've reviewed in preparation for that call. So I think that's a really unique idea, to be able to walk the client through the proposal together. It gives them an opportunity to ask questions, but at each stage of the process, you as the freelancer are leading with value. You are talking about the value in the pitch. You're continuing it in the initial call. You're doing it during the call to walk them through the proposal as well. So these are great opportunities. You're keeping it really personalized too, right? This isn't the mass pitch of, hey, I'm a writer. Is your company hiring writers right now? This is really like, I'm building you a custom proposal based off of what we discussed, where your company's at right now and where you want to go. So do you have any tips for, let's say the client isn't comfortable with signing the proposal just yet on that phone call when you walk them through it? How do you recommend following up so that they don't just kind of drop off the radar and end up ghosting you?
Okay, so a couple of points. As a service provider, what I found is that we have a very, very limited amount of time. So you have to think of like your time as incredibly valuable. And so why would you want to work with clients who are not going to like specifically want to work with you and kind of build awesome things together? You just don't have the time to work with people looking for generic writers, essentially. So, but in terms of getting to the proposal, so that's again Joanna Weeb's idea, the whole presenting thing. That would not have occurred to me, but once I've started doing it, I've basically had about 100% success rate. Because by the time we get to the proposal, we're both very committed. But let's say you do get to the proposal and for whatever reason, they're not sure. Sometimes they may need to go to a bigger decision maker, especially when you're working with larger companies. It just takes longer to get through like all the decision steps. So that's when I find it's very important to set a very clear follow-up. So let's say you end the proposal call and they say, you know what, Sophia, I'm not sure about this right now. I need to speak to my manager. That's when you set a specific timeline. So you go like, hey, so I'll get in touch with you on, let's say we had the call on Wednesday. I'll get in touch with you on Monday. Let's book like a 5-minute chat and just go over it. And then you need to follow up and make sure that they have everything you need. Because sometimes it's decision-making things. Sometimes it's just that you didn't communicate the value clearly enough. And so it's about making them feel safe and making them feel that this is the right choice for them. Assuming, of course, that it is the right choice for them. Like ideally, by this point, you both feel very confident that this project will give the client the results they want.
Absolutely, because you've done all the research, you've had the conversation with them, and you've built a custom proposal based off of that. Now, when you're sending cold pitches, is there a point at which you consider that your cold pitches aren't working and maybe you need to get help or you need to change things up? I mean, a lot of people ask all the time, well, if I send 10 cold pitches, like how many calls should I get from that? And how many clients should I get from that? And that's such an impossible question to answer because it really does vary from one client to another. But would you say there's a point where if you've sent X many pitches and you're getting like no results, that it's time to really change things or realize that maybe that industry isn't the right fit?
Okay, so another thing which I didn't realize is that you also have to think about it seasonally. In certain seasons and certain industries, you're going to close more people. And that's not necessarily to do with how effective your email is. It's to do with the time of the year. So personally, I found that winter for me in my industries works a lot better than summer. Summer is just this dead zone. And so when I sent cold email pitches last summer, I was like, hang on, like, why isn't this working as well as it was in November? Like my emails are still good. And that's just when I kind of realized that people are just working on less things at that time. But what I found for me is I like to do, because mine are quite personalized, I like to do 20 before I start rethinking the pitch. So I'd send 20 emails. I would analyze like the subject lines, what's working, what isn't working. And then I would start making small tweaks from there. But go with a small measurable tweak. So just tweak one thing and then see how it performs. And the other thing about cold emailing is you have to follow up. Sometimes people just haven't seen you pitch. So one thing I've tried is like just changing the subject line. And if they didn't open it, so should have mentioned first, I use a software called Mixmax to track open rates and click-through rates. So I know how my pitches are performing. And so if I see that somebody didn't open it, I'll just test a different subject line and see, okay, so maybe this first one didn't catch their attention. Would this catch it? If they open the email but they don't respond, I'd usually wait about a week and just send a follow-up. And now I have tested the follow-up that a lot of people hate, of like, hey, I'm just following up on this email. And that has worked. I've also tried sending the same email again, just pretending that like I didn't send it in the first place. Not pretending, but it's just not guilting the other person into like feeling bad for not replying. And the third follow-up technique I've tried is just sending them something else that's interesting or relevant, or just like continuing the conversation. Like, oh, hey, so I read this piece of industry news and I thought of you. And just something personal that kind of builds the relationship. But follow-up is key because people are busy and they don't know you. They have no reason to reply to you.
Yes. And I mean, everybody's email inboxes are just flooded. And so sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, and it's not necessarily that your pitch was bad, but maybe the person didn't have time to review it, or it just didn't get their attention. And so it's your job to do what you can to get their attention. But even if you have an amazing subject line and an amazing pitch, not every client is going to read it. Not every client is going to get on the phone with you. So don't expect perfection in that way. But I love the idea of tracking who's opening your emails as well, capturing some data around these trends to help you make really informed decisions about tweaking your pitches when necessary. Well, this has been amazingly helpful. I know I've learned a lot about cold pitching. Where can listeners go to learn a little bit more about you?
So my website's sophiadagnon.com, and I also put together a freebie of basically 3 of my cold email templates that you can download and test, and they have examples as well of like the emails I actually sent. Obviously, the only thing I've changed is the names and like relevant data, but everything else is exactly as I sent them.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for